You're listening to the Libertarian Express Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to today's episode. It is October 24th, 2013, and this is Libertarian Express Radio Network. I am Robert Rowe. Today, as I sit here and talk with you, I've been listening to the hearings on Capitol Hill regarding the contractors who have put together this Affordable Care Act website, also known as the Obamacare website. Now, let's face it, this whole damn law is a travesty. It's a train wreck. It's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt bad. And everything associated with this up to this point has borne that out to be true. But I noticed that the contractors who built the various portions of this website, none of them accepted any of the blame at all for this website not functioning properly. They all blame it on Department of Human Services. Every one of them has said it's the Department of Human Services' fault. The fact that we can't code properly is not our fault. It's the fault of the Department of Human Services. The fact that the portions that we built don't work is not our fault. It's all the fault of the Department of Human Services. Now, I expect this kind of crap from politicians, okay, because they're just children who haven't learned how to behave themselves. That's why they're politicians. They can't get a job in the real world. But I expect more from a corporation. And I guess maybe I shouldn't. I guess maybe I'm naive in thinking that a corporation would probably take at least a little bit of responsibility. But I guess I was wrong there. But let's face it, the whole Obamacare thing is a travesty. It's a train wreck, and it's going to kill us. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But today, for this episode, I want to talk about what makes a law a good law versus a bad law. And I'm going to teach you how to educate your politicians on how to determine the difference between a good law and a bad law and how they should vote. A good law is one they vote yes on, and a bad law is one they vote no on, for example. Okay? As the name of this podcast suggests, I'm a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian simply because I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. That's not what makes me a libertarian. I'm a libertarian because I support the cause of liberty and freedom. That's what being a libertarian means. Now, yes, I know there's more to it than that, but that's the simplified version, and I believe in keeping things simple. And as I mentioned, I'm a member of the Libertarian Party, and I support libertarian candidates in the elections when I agree with their platform. I admit I don't always agree with the party on certain things, but in general I find I can support their platform. The reason for this is because the Libertarian Party is the only party left out there that is both moderate, not left, not right, right in the middle, in its platform, and still supports personal individual freedom. And there's no other party out there that supports freedom in any way other than talk. The problem here is that freedom means something different to different factions. The Republicans view freedom as something to pay lip service to during the election season and then turn around and vote against it while they're in office. Republicans tend to be very much more authoritarian. To Democrats, freedom is an obstacle to be overcome. Although, to be fair, they do often use the term freedom as a euphemism for socialism or communism. Now, to a constitutionalist, freedom is a very narrow set of parameters defined in the U.S. Constitution. To them, if it's not in the Constitution, it does not represent freedom. Period. It's a very narrow view. Now the thing is all these are viable. They're all perfectly viable views on life, views on political stances. But a libertarian, to them, a freedom is a very broad and beautiful concept, which all people are entitled to have and practice. To a libertarian, freedom is the right to live and do as you please, as long as you're not causing harm to somebody else. Now, this is different from anarchy, because anarchy is everybody is on their own. You do whatever you want to accomplish whatever goals you need. Now, most anarchists would tell you that anarchy also means that you don't harm other people, that you help other people. And while that might be true in writing, in practice it never works that way. Anarchy cannot ever work. Human beings cannot live in an anarchic state. So anyway, it's important to me that we vote libertarians into office. Now, lawmakers need to have a third voice or a fourth voice or whatever, but they need a voice of reason while they're arguing the merits of a new law that's designed to increase government power and minimize personal individual freedom. They need a reasonable person who will not throw a temper tantrum when they don't get their way. They need a person who can keep things moving and develop meaningful compromise. They need a strong parental figure to give them a political spanking when they misbehave. I think I touched on that a little bit in my last podcast. But most of all, they need a person who will remind lawmakers that this is a country that supports personal, individual freedom, and any bills for consideration should be designed to reflect that standard and no other. But for whatever reason, it appears that this is a concept that Congress has not learned. And they need to be educated on what this means and what their responsibilities to the people are so they can pass good and just laws. So the question then becomes, how do we educate lawmakers on how to tell if a law is a good law or a bad law? And again, we need to keep it simple because these are politicians after all. They really aren't too bright. If you don't believe me, look at our current crop of politicians and tell me how bright they are. So in this episode, I want to teach you how to educate your politicians. And to do this, let's keep it simple. If a proposed law enhances or expands personal freedom, then it's a good law. If a law increases government size or power in any way, then it's a bad law. That's it. It really is that simple. I told you, I like it simple. So what does it mean to enhance personal freedom? What do I mean when I say that? Well, let's look for guidance on what this could mean. Let's look at the Declaration of Independence and see if we can get any kind of an inkling of an understanding of what that means. I mean, surely in this document that outlines a long series of abuses by the King of England against the colonists, there must be some indication of what we believe to be good laws. Because we already know what bad laws are. It outlines it very succinctly. So does it give us an indication of what a good law would be? Well, when we read it, we see a passage which states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." There you have it. In this country, we believe above all other things, the single most sacrosanct concept is to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. There is nothing more important. And then the founders went on to eventually create a constitution which codified exactly what that meant. But in the 18th century, there was no way the founders could possibly have known what life would be like in the fledgling country in the 21st century. They couldn't know that any more than you and I can know what life is going to be like in the 24th century. But what they did know is that there are certain concepts that will remain constant in all centuries. Freedom is one of those constants. So they designed a constitution to codify what freedom means. And in their wisdom, knowing that they could not predict the future, they allowed a means by which the Constitution could be managed to reflect the challenges that the future would certainly bring, but maintaining freedom as the only constant. So again, what does it mean to enhance personal freedom? When we look at the Declaration of Independence, we find it's, well, simple. If a proposed law should in any way restrict, nullify any part of, or eliminate a law that's currently in existence, which guarantees or permits persons to behave in a way that increases their ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then it's a bad law. If a proposed law should create a new law which restricts or eliminates, even to the smallest degree, a person's ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, then it's a bad law. If a proposed law should create an increase in government size or power, it's a bad law. So let me put politicians on notice right here, right now. When it's a bad law, your only vote should be no. Doesn't matter what party you belong to. Bad laws equal no vote. Period. However, if a proposed law expands a law that's currently in existence that guarantees or permits persons to behave in a way that increases their ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, then the law is a good law. In other words, if it decreases restrictions on people and allowing them a greater ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, then it's a good law. If a proposed law should create a new law which expands or creates personal individual freedom, allowing a person to more easily pursue life, liberty, and happiness, then it's a good law. If a proposed law should decrease the size and or power of government, then it's a good law. Politicians, take note of this. When a law is a good law, your vote is yes. We like that law. Thumbs up. Should be no other vote but yes or yay. It's that simple. Let's take an example. Let's say somebody comes up with a law. Now, this is just an example off the top of my head. Let's just say somebody decides that they want to propose a bill for Congress to consider that prohibits homosexuality in this country. In my mind, that's a bad law. Now, it doesn't matter what your personal feeling on homosexuality is, whether you think it's a good thing, a bad thing, they're going to burn in hell, they're going to go to heaven, they're going to become angels, they're going to become devils. I don't care what your personal view is. The fact is, it's still a bad law. Because if a person believes himself to be gay, and it makes him happy to be gay, then who the hell am I, or you, or anybody else, to tell him he's wrong? If it's wrong to be gay, then that's between him and his God, and nobody else. Not you, not me, not anybody else. But if a law prohibits murder, that would be a good law, because murder tends to eliminate opportunities to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So prohibitions against murder are good. See how simple it is? Laws designed to enhance liberty are good laws, and laws designed to restrict liberty are bad laws. It's that simple. There doesn't have to be red tape. There doesn't have to be gray areas. There doesn't have to be anything other than, does it promote freedom? If the answer is yes, then vote yes. If the answer is no, then vote no. All right, let's look at some real-life examples of good laws and bad laws. I'm going to give you one of each. Now, in the forefront of everybody's mind right now is the Affordable Care Act. Now, the Affordable Care Act, I'm sure, started out with good intentions because, let's face it, in this country, everybody should have access to affordable health care. There's no reason that we shouldn't. There are countries out there that are extremely more impoverished than we are, because we're the wealthiest nation in the world. And they manage successfully to provide health care for everybody in their country. Now, granted, I will admit that they don't necessarily all have 300 million people in them. And that does make it a bit more of a challenge. But let's face it, in this country, we should be able to do it. But this Affordable Care Act is not the way to do it. I mean, first off, the name itself is a lie. There's nothing at all affordable about this law. Let's look at history. When states began to mandate that people have automobile insurance, what happened to the cost of automobile insurance? It went up immediately. Why? It's simple greed. The insurance companies knew that people had to purchase their services no matter what the cost was. And they took advantage of that. And it took decades for the prices to come down to something reasonable. So why did anyone in Congress think that health insurance would be any different? Because they're dealing with the same damn group of people. And it turns out it wasn't any different. The cost of health insurance went up anywhere from 50% to 125%, depending on what state you live in. But that, believe it or not, is not what makes this a bad law. That only makes it unaffordable. What makes this a bad law is that it restricts a person's ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. How do I know this? Let me give you a real-life example. Me. The reason I'm giving you me as a real-life example is because I give myself permission to do so. I don't have to wait for somebody else's permission to use their info. For my family to purchase health insurance, we will spend more each month on insurance premiums than we will on our mortgage. It used to be in this country that your mortgage was your single greatest expense for most people, most middle-class Americans. You got a mortgage, that was your largest expense each month. That will no longer be the case for most people. Now, health insurance will be our single greatest expense. Not just me, most people. And by most people, I don't mean 51%. By most people, I mean 80 to 90% of the people in this country who purchase health insurance. That will become their greatest expense each month. People are going to lose their homes because they will no longer be able to afford their mortgages. People are going to go hungry because they will have to choose between obeying the law and purchasing insurance that they don't want or may not even need, or eating. It's going to cost my family more than our mortgage, our automobile insurance, and our city water service combined to be able to afford, to be able to purchase health insurance. If we cut out things like food, clothing, if we disconnect our internet, if we stop watching television, get rid of our cell phones, stop putting gasoline in our cars, we might be able to afford health insurance at that point. Now let me ask you a question. How many people out there enjoy their internet service? Well, if you're listening to this, you obviously have internet service, and you obviously must enjoy your internet service. It makes you happy, doesn't it? Having a cell phone makes a lot of people happy because they can communicate at a moment's notice anywhere that they're at. Doesn't matter where they are in the world, they can pick up their cell phone, they can call mom. Having food makes most people that I know happy. I know a couple of bulimics that might be a different story, but the fact is we need food. Having food makes us happy. I can't tell you how many times I sit down at the dinner table watching my daughter eat, and she's smiling through the whole dinner. You know why? Because she's being fed, and that makes her happy. Now, she's only 8 years old. She probably doesn't realize that concept yet, that the food makes her happy, but it does. I like to watch football on my television on Sundays. It's one of the few pleasures that I have in life. One of the few things I look forward to each week. It makes me happy. Especially when the Dolphins win. So, if having to give up all those things that make me happy in order to come into compliance with this law is not a good example of restricting the pursuit of happiness, I don't know what is. Now, I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. Put this program on pause or whatever. I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. What are you going to have to give up that makes you happy in order to come into compliance with this law? Now, personally, I don't know how we're going to come into compliance with this law because we just can't afford it. And I'll be honest with you, we might not come into compliance with this law. We might just tell them to go to hell because the fine is a lot cheaper. We can budget in the fine. We can't budget in the health insurance costs. Now, there are 100 other reasons why this law is a bad law. But I want to keep this simple with real-world examples. And the truth is, this law is going to impoverish those who are living at or near the poverty level. People like my family. It's going to cause the middle class to start living at or near the poverty level. And the only people who are going to benefit from this law are those who own stock in insurance companies. All right, enough on the bad laws because my blood pressure's going up and I don't need to have a heart attack while I'm trying to record this. So let's talk about a good law. Now, I want everybody to take note of the state of Oregon for right now. Now, the state of Oregon is a very unique blend of liberal and conservative values. Now, because there are a lot of people migrating up from California, the liberals are starting to win out right now, but they still hold a lot of conservative values in that state. But that state currently has a law that does not allow a person to defend their life or their property with force, be it lethal or otherwise. Now, this is not a good law because it allows criminals to sue a property owner if they are harmed in any way during a commission of a crime against that property owner. I know that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But in the state of Oregon, that's the case. So, let's take a hypothetical situation. A guy wants to burgle your house. He breaks a window in order to gain entry into your house, and in the process, he cuts his arm, and he requires stitches. Guess who has to pay for those stitches? Him? No. The property owner? You betcha. And then on top of that, the criminal can even sue for further damages if he wants to. From his jail cell, he can sue. It's ridiculous. The criminal who's actively engaged in denying the property owner his right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, he gets his rights further denied to him by this criminal. Okay, I cannot in any way rationalize this. Now, maybe some of my liberal friends can come and give me a reason why it's rational to allow a person who's committing a crime against me to sue me because he gets hurt in the commission of a crime. I want to know what the rationale behind that is. Now, additionally, if the owner or resident of the property should use force of any kind, including lethal force, against the criminal perpetrating the crime, the victim goes to prison, not the criminal. Well, let me rephrase that. The criminal also goes to prison for his attempt at a crime. But the person defending his home, his property, goes to prison also. Now, to be fair, if there is an imminent threat to life, force can be used to prevent the loss of life under the current law. But it has to be an imminent threat. In other words, the criminal has to have a gun pointed at you and be in the act of pulling the trigger before you're allowed to take action against him, before you're allowed to use force against him. Now, unfortunately, the way the law is written, the victim of the crime is presumed guilty unless that person can prove an imminent threat to life. However, there is a movement going on in Oregon. There's a push underway to get a so-called castle law on the ballot for their next election cycle. This law would take away the right of a criminal to sue a property owner if he's injured during the commission of a crime against that property owner. It also allows the property owner or the resident of the property to defend that property with force if necessary, up to and including lethal force, without fear of criminal prosecution. Now, in my mind, this is a good law because it allows one to defend and keep what he has gained through the fruits of his pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. In other words, it enhances and expands that person's liberty. This law should be passed. Now, currently, there are over 100,000 federal laws, most of which are designed to reduce, restrict, or eliminate a person's pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Now, there are obviously some good laws in that bunch, but there are far too many bad ones. So it's time that we force Congress to look at those 100,000 plus laws and do away with any and all laws which restrict a person's natural right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. We need to take control of Congress, and we need to remind them that they work for us. They do not rule over us. When we allow Congress to rule over us, we no longer live in a free country. I know, you're saying to yourself right now, "But Robert, you ignoramus, we have a constitution that guarantees our rights." That's where your thinking is starting to become flawed. Our Constitution does not guarantee a damn thing. It's merely a piece of paper with words written on it. It's a document that outlines and codifies what we believe to be the ideal way to operate a society. It guarantees nothing. No assemblage of words will ever guarantee anything. What guarantees your rights is your action. What guarantees the rights outlined in the Constitution is people practicing those rights. Your right to free speech is only guaranteed if you practice your right to free speech. Your right to worship your God in your way without fear of persecution is only guaranteed by your practicing that right. Your right to bear arms is only guaranteed if you own a firearm and you practice with it on a regular basis, safely. The point is, it's up to you and me to guarantee our freedoms. No piece of paper or parchment can do that. If you don't exercise your rights, you give up those rights. If you don't peaceably assemble and protest for redress of grievances, then you give up the right to do so. If you're sitting on a jury and you don't exercise your right to nullify a bad law, then you give up your right to jury nullification power. If you don't like your local school district and you don't homeschool your children, then you give up your right to homeschool. Exercising your rights is the only way to guarantee your rights. Of course, owning a firearm gives teeth to your exercising of your rights. Take from that whatever you will. So in your state's next election cycle, when you're considering which person you think would be best for the job of representing you, consider a few things. Now, I'm going to make a few outlandish comments here. I don't want you to get hung up on the outlandishness of the comments. I want you to take the comment as a whole and try to understand the totality of what I'm about to tell you, all right? If the person is an incumbent, look at their voting record. Look at their history. Only if the person is an incumbent do you want to look at their history. If they have a history of voting for laws that restrict personal freedom, then that person is not right for the job of representing you, or anybody for that matter. If that person has a record of voting for laws which enhance personal freedoms, consider voting for that person regardless of what party he or she belongs to. Now here's where I'm going to say some things that are a little bit outlandish. If the person is not an incumbent, pay careful attention to their message. What party do they support? Do they support a party that supports authoritarianism? Do they support a party that supports communism? Do they support a party that looks at freedom as a very narrowly defined set of very narrow set of rules? Are they part of one of the repressive parties like the Republicans or the Democrats? Do they talk about freedom and yet support laws which restrict freedom? Don't concern yourself with the stupid stuff, like whether or not they pulled little Susie's hair in grammar school, or if they smoked pot in college. Those are unimportant. Look at their current character. Was he convicted of using meth in 1985? Okay, that's not good. But is he clean and sober now? If yes, then listen to what he has to say. So what if he used meth back in the 90s? That was then. Leave his past in the past. I mean, let's face it. An ex-convict is much more keenly aware of what it means to have freedom taken away from them than a person who has taken it for granted all of their life. If you've never been to prison, then you don't have an idea of what it's like to lose your freedom. And I guarantee you the ex-convict is going to be more willing to fight for freedom than a person who has never been to prison. Now, I'm not telling you to go out there and vote for somebody just because he's an ex-con. Okay, I'm not saying that at all. Okay? But I am saying they are likely to have a more enlightened view on expanding freedom than someone who has always taken it for granted. What if she is a veteran who stole a loaf of bread once because she was starving and homeless when she came back from the war back in 2001? Okay, she did a bad thing, that's true. But how is she doing now? Has she gotten her life together? If she has, then listen to her. She's put her life on the line for freedom's sake. She has likely also had that freedom taken away from her. Now you want to talk about a person with a unique perspective on freedom? She's the one. Listen to what she has to say. In other words, don't let media histrionics about a person's past influence your decisions. Take a look at who they are now. Take a look at the message they present now. And again, I'm not telling you to go out and vote for ex-cons or veterans. I'm telling you to do your research and take a good, hard look at the person as they stand before you. Don't judge them by their past mistakes. Judge them based on what they have learned from those mistakes. And for the love of all that is good, if they tell you they didn't inhale, don't vote for them. If they're so inept that they don't know how to properly smoke a joint, then they are not a person we want representing us in public office. I'm Robert Rowe. Thank you for listening to today's show. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to discuss, you can email me at libertarianexpress@gmail.com. That's libertarianexpress@gmail.com. And as always, I hope you have a great day.